Welcome back, everybody. After I put out Rai vs Zen, I've had a lot of people ask me how I choreograph my fights, so today I'm going to be breaking down my process and hopefully passing on some useful advice for anyone looking to make their fights a little more engaging. I'm by no means an expert since I'm also still learning, but I'm going to be going over how I tend to structure my fight scenes, so the applicability of these tips will ultimately depend on what you're aiming to do with your own animations. If this helps or is just an interesting watch, then leave a like on the video and I'll be more likely to make more informative content in this style in the future. Also, if you're interested in downloading any of my animation files, I have a link to my Ko-fi page in the description where you can get them if you feel like supporting the channel. The first stage is planning what you want to happen during your fight scene, which is useful either if you're less experienced in choreography or if it's a more ambitious project doing something like trying to tell a story or convey a theme without words. I find it useful to consider the context surrounding the fight, such as who is fighting where and why. The two fighters in this animation are Rai and Zen, who both have unique fighting styles, are only sparring, are equal in skill, know how the other person fights, and are going to be attempting to surprise each other or catch the other person off guard. I tried making a point to show that Rai is most comfortable in a fight when he's dodging instead of blocking, and I'll get into how I did that a little bit later on. The background didn't play much of a factor besides the characters dipping behind the pillars, but any interaction with the surroundings would help add a little bit of flair or make your characters seem more adaptable. When planning out the choreography itself, I started writing it all out and collecting references to use as a guide for stronger poses or more complex actions. For example, these two kicks Rai does here were referenced from real life videos online, which I generally recommend over referencing actions from games or other animations. It lets you get an understanding of the move in a realistic setting before stylizing it for your own animations, but a lot of animations or games have already stylized actions meant to be viewed in motion, which can make studying the individual frames a little less practical. That doesn't mean you should never use games for references, as even I have here, because they can be useful to get an idea about exaggerated poses or movements that are either too difficult or too specific to be replicated in real life. With that out of the way, we can get into breaking down the actual fight. The fight starts with the characters at about mid-range, so since Zen is the one with the weapon and therefore the slightly longer reach, she's going to be the one to begin the engagement. This means that Zen is the one acting while Rai is reacting in this scenario. You can watch this video on screen to hear my explanation for how I animate with this in mind, but in a fight between two people it's important to vary which character is acting and for how long to avoid the fight becoming repetitive. Rai simply dodges all three attacks since, like I said, that's his preference, and sets up a counter directed at Zen's head. She disengages back to mid-range and sheaths her sword, but to avoid losing his advantage, Rai chases her down with two kicks, and although she avoids the first, she has to block the second and mitigate the damage. Although sheathing your weapon mid-fight isn't something you do in real life, it allowed her to conceal her weapon from Rai's perspective and surprise him enough to make him block her next attack. He blocks her next swing too, but this was more a decision on my end to keep the flow of the fight faster. Any reference video would show that the kick Rai does in response requires the arm on the same side to be raised before coming down as the body turns to generate force. Having Rai already in this position let me decrease the number of frames needed to anticipate the kick so that the fight wouldn't slow down as much. Rai ducks under her next swing, and his next flurry at Zen's head lets him check her guard again to show the force behind each of his hits before blocking a swing that's infused with Zen's powers. From here the fight begins to shift more into Zen's favor as she pushes past Rai's guard and keeps him on the defensive. Zen blocks one of Rai's punches with the pommel of her sword, and since these are trained fictional characters, Rai has no visible reaction to it. But if you wanted to portray a less experienced, more realistic, or even a comical fighter, they could shake their hand in pain or something like that to show that it was unexpected. The two tray hits again until Zen blocks a punch and is able to deflect it this time instead of being pushed back, but she fails to capitalize on the opening she created and gets her attack dodged. With Rai in a more controllable position, he grabs her sword and is able to land the first and only two hits in the fight before performing an over-the-shoulder judo throw called Seonage, although again sacrificing some realism as his aim was to create space between the two of them rather than an attempt to ground her. Here it's important to consider the context surrounding the fight, being that of a spar, since originally I was considering Rai breaking her weapon once he grabbed it. In a different scenario I probably would have chosen this, but since they're only training it wouldn't have made as much sense. Instead, she's able to use her sword to block another head kick by reinforcing it with her powers, and she then responds to Rai's ranged attacks with two of her own, and eventually the two enter a clash and the fight ends in a draw. I hope this quick little video was able to explain my thought process and give you guys some insight into creating fight choreography. I read a comment counting the number of attacks each character's had, so I thought I'd do my own count, and honestly I didn't expect them to be this close. Both characters threw out 19 attacks and dodged 7. Rai blocked 12 attacks compared to Zen's 10, only because of the two hits Rai managed to connect near the end of the fight. I did intend for the fight to be a draw, but I'm not going to sit here and act like this wasn't a coincidence. When I did a poll on my community tab, almost 70% of people thought Rai was the winner, so leave a comment on if you still think that, or if the context behind Zen's additional pressure made you change your mind. And if you guys want more breakdowns on future animations or even older ones, let me know that too, but regardless, thank you guys for watching.